Hey there, and welcome to Dark Creaky TV. If you're new, hit that subscribe button for spine-tingling Reddit creepypasta stories that are perfect for a night of chilling thrills. Don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and let's get into tonight's stories. I found Baba Roga off the Ouija board the night she knocked on my window. So, I've always been into weird stuff, ghost stories, urban legends, that sort of thing. I used to binge watch those paranormal investigation shows with my buddies in college. We even dabbled in ghost hunting ourselves a few times, but nothing serious ever came out of it. Just a bunch of drunk dudes wandering through abandoned buildings with cheap flashlights. But last week, something happened that made me reconsider everything I thought I knew about the supernatural. It all started on a random Tuesday night. My girlfriend, Jenna, was out of town visiting her folks, so I had the place to myself. Bored out of my mind, I decided to clean up the attic. A task I'd been putting off for months. While sifting through old boxes of junk, I stumbled upon an old Ouija board. I had completely forgotten I even had it. It was one of those cheesy ones you buy at a novelty store, but for some reason I felt an urge to mess around with it. I set it up on the coffee table in my living room, lit a couple of candles to set the mood, and poured myself a glass of whiskey. The house was eerily quiet, the only sound being the occasional creak of the floorboards. I placed my fingers on the planchette and asked the usual questions. Is anyone there? What's your name? How did you die? You know, the typical Ouija board stuff. Nothing happened at first, just like all the other times I tried it. But then, after what felt like an eternity, the planchette started to move. Slowly at first, like it was struggling to get going. My heart was pounding in my chest as it spelled out Babaroga. I had never heard that name before, but it sent a chill down my spine. I asked it more questions, but it didn't respond. Instead, the candles flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. I was freaked out, but also exhilarated. I quickly googled Baba Roga on my phone, expecting to find some obscure myth or urban legend. What I found was far worse. Baba Roga is apparently some kind of Slavic boogeyman, an old hag that kidnaps children and devours them. There were stories of her creeping into homes at night, snatching kids from their beds, and taking them to her lair. It sounded like a load of crap, but something about it felt disturbingly real. Trying to shake off the unease, I decided to call it a night. I tossed the Ouija board back in the attic and went to bed, but sleep didn't come easy. I kept hearing strange noises coming from outside, like someone was walking around the house. I chalked it up to my imagination and eventually drifted off. The next day, things got even weirder. I woke up to find muddy footprints leading from my front door to my bedroom window. They were small, almost childlike, but the toes were elongated and clawed. I checked all the doors and windows, but everything was locked. There was no sign of a break-in. I was officially creeped out. I decided to spend the day out of the house, thinking some fresh air might help clear my head. I met up with a friend for lunch and told him about what happened. He laughed it off, saying I was just spooked because I was alone. Maybe he was right, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. That night, I was too freaked out to sleep in my bedroom, so I crashed on the couch. I left the TV on for some background noise, hoping it would help me relax. Sometime around 3 a.m, I woke up to a soft tapping on the window. My heart skipped a beat as I slowly turned to look. There, pressed against the glass, was a grotesque, wrinkled face with milky white eyes. Her mouth was stretched into a twisted grin, revealing rows of sharp yellow teeth. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to move or even scream. She tapped again, harder this time, her long, bony fingers leaving smudges on the glass. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at her, but eventually she just vanished, like she was never there. I bolted up and checked the window, but there was nothing. No smudges, no footprints, nothing. I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat in the middle of the living room, clutching a baseball bat and waiting for dawn. When the sun finally came up, I felt a small sense of relief, but I knew I couldn't stay in that house another night. I packed a bag and decided to crash at Jenna's place until she got back. That was the last time I saw Baba Roga, but I still feel her presence, like she's watching and waiting. I don't know what I did to summon her, or why she chose me, but I can't shake the feeling that she's not done with me yet. I need to find a way to get rid of her before it's too late. The days following that night were a blur of paranoia and sleeplessness. I crashed at Jenna's place, hoping the distance would keep me safe from whatever the hell Baba Roga was. Jenna was due back in a few days, and I didn't want to freak her out with my wild story, so I tried to keep it together. But even in her cozy apartment, I couldn't escape the feeling that something was terribly wrong. It started with little things, scratching noises coming from the walls, like tiny claws dragging across the plaster. I convinced myself it was just mice, even though Jenna had never mentioned having a rodent problem. Then, one night, I was jolted awake by the sound of whispering. It was faint, almost like a breeze carrying distant voices, but it was there. I couldn't make out what was being said, but it felt like someone, or something, was calling my name. I tried to brush it off as my mind playing tricks on me. Stress and lack of sleep can do weird things to a person. But the next day, I found something that made my blood run cold. Jenna's bathroom mirror was fogged up, like someone had just taken a hot shower, except I hadn't used the shower that morning. As I wiped away the condensation, I saw it. Words written in the fog, like a ghostly finger had traced them out. I see you. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over the bath mat. My heart was pounding in my chest as I grabbed my phone and snapped a picture. I needed proof, something to show Jenna that I wasn't losing my mind. But when I looked at the photo, there was nothing there. The mirror was clear. My hands were shaking as I tried to make sense of it. Maybe it was a prank, or maybe I was really going crazy. Either way, I couldn't stay there. I spent the next few hours at a local cafe, nursing a coffee and trying to figure out my next move. I googled everything I could about Baba Roga, desperate for some kind of solution. Most of the information was vague, old folklore about how she could only enter your home if you invited her in, or how she preyed on the fearful and desperate. But there was one thing that caught my eye. A post on an obscure paranormal forum. It was a long thread about banishing dark entities, and one user claimed to have gotten rid of Baba Roga by performing a cleansing ritual. The ritual seemed simple enough. Salt, sage, and a bunch of chanting. I figured it was worth a shot. I went to the nearest metaphysical shop and bought everything I needed. By the time I got back to Jenna's place, the sun was setting. I felt a sense of urgency, like I needed to do this before it got dark. I started with the salt, making a protective circle around myself in the living room. The air felt heavy, oppressive, like something was watching me. As I lit the sage and started the chant, the temperature dropped. I could see my breath misting in front of me, and the shadows in the corners of the room seemed to twist and writhe. The chanting grew louder, more desperate, as I tried to keep my focus. The scratching noises were back, louder than ever, and the whispers were almost deafening. "Come to me," they hissed. "Let me in." I felt a cold hand on my shoulder, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. I spun around, but there was nothing there, just the empty room and the flickering candlelight. I kept chanting, my voice cracking with fear. The air was so cold now that my fingers were numb, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. Suddenly, there was a loud bang from the bedroom, like something heavy had been thrown against the wall. I clutched the sage tighter, the smoke swirling around me in a protective cloud. Then, as quickly as it had started, everything went silent. The temperature slowly returned to normal, and the oppressive feeling lifted. I sagged to the floor, exhausted, but relieved. Maybe the ritual had worked. Maybe I had finally rid myself of Baba Roga. I stayed in the salt circle until dawn, too scared to move. When the first light of morning filtered through the blinds, I cautiously stepped out of the circle. Everything seemed normal. I checked the bathroom mirror. No messages. The walls were silent. For the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of hope, but that hope was shattered when I went to the bedroom. The door was ajar, and as I pushed it open, I saw it, a crude drawing of an old hag scratched into the wood with jagged claw-like marks. Below it were the words, "Not done yet." I backed out of the room, my mind racing. She was still here. The ritual hadn't worked. I needed help, someone who knew more about this stuff than I did. I grabbed my phone and called the only person I could think of, Maggie, an old college friend who was into all things paranormal. She answered groggily, but when I explained what was happening, she agreed to come over. Maggie arrived an hour later, armed with a backpack full of occult supplies. She took one look at the drawing on the bedroom door and paled. "This is bad," she said. "Really bad." She set up a makeshift altar in the living room and started preparing for another ritual, this one much more complex. As she worked, she explained that Baba Roga wasn't just a ghost or a demon. She was something much older and more dangerous. "You must have really pissed her off," Maggie said, giving me a pointed look. "This is going to take some serious power to banish her." We spent the rest of the day preparing, and as night fell, we began the ritual. Maggie led the chants this time, her voice strong and steady. I followed her lead, hoping against hope that this would work. The air grew cold again, and the shadows seemed to move of their own accord. But this time, I felt a presence, a dark, malevolent force pushing against our circle of protection. Maggie kept chanting, her voice rising in intensity. The room shook, and the whispers grew louder, more insistent. "Let me in," they demanded. "Let me in." I felt something cold brush against my cheek, and I bit back a scream. The pressure was immense, like the weight of the entire house was pressing down on us. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, there was a flash of light, and the oppressive feeling vanished. The room was still, the air warm and comforting. Maggie slumped to the floor, exhausted but triumphant. "I think we did it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I wanted to believe her, but a nagging doubt lingered in the back of my mind. We had done everything right, but something didn't feel complete. As I helped Maggie clean up, I couldn't shake the feeling that Baba Roga was still out there, watching and waiting for the right moment to strike. And then, just as we finished, I heard it, the soft, unmistakable sound of tapping on the window. I spun around, my heart thudding in my chest. Maggie looked at me, her face pale. The tapping was faint, but unmistakable, like nails gently scraping against the glass. I grabbed the baseball bat I'd left by the couch and motioned for Maggie to stay back. Slowly, I approached the window, my grip tightening on the bat. The room was eerily silent except for the relentless tapping. As I drew closer, I could see a shadowy figure just outside the window. My breath caught in my throat as the figure moved into the light, revealing Baba Roga's twisted, grinning face. Her eyes, those milky white orbs, seemed to bore into my soul. She tapped again, her claw-like fingers leaving faint marks on the glass. I couldn't move. Fear rooted me to the spot as she leaned closer, her face almost pressing against the window. She opened her mouth, revealing those sharp yellow teeth, and whispered a single word. "Soon." The word echoed in my head, filling me with a dread so intense it felt like my heart might stop. Maggie snapped me out of my paralysis with a sharp whisper. "We need to leave, now." She grabbed my arm and pulled me towards the door. We didn't bother to pack anything. We just ran, out of the apartment, down the stairs, and into the car. We drove in silence, the fear palpable between us. After what felt like hours, we ended up at a 24-hour diner on the outskirts of town. We sat in a corner booth, nursing cups of coffee and trying to figure out our next move. Maggie was the first to speak. "We need to find someone who knows more about this, someone with real experience." I nodded, my mind racing. "Do you know anyone?" She sighed, rubbing her temples. "There's a guy I know. He runs a paranormal research group. He's a bit of a crackpot, but he's dealt with some serious stuff before. His name's Dr. Lancaster. I was willing to try anything at this point. Let's go. We drove to Dr. Lancaster's place, a run-down old house on the edge of town. It looked like something out of a horror movie, with overgrown weeds and broken windows. Maggie knocked on the door, and after a tense few moments, it creaked open to reveal a tall, thin man with wild grey hair and piercing blue eyes. "Maggie," he said, his voice a low rumble. "What brings you here at this hour?" She quickly explained the situation, and his expression grew serious. "Baba Roga," he muttered. "Nasty business. Come in." We followed him into a cluttered living room filled with books, strange artifacts, and equipment I couldn't even begin to understand. He gestured for us to sit, then began pulling books off the shelves, flipping through them rapidly. "Baba Roga is more than just a spirit," he explained. "She's an ancient entity, a manifestation of fear and darkness. Banishing her isn't just about rituals. You need to understand her, confront her." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What do we need to do?" He looked at me, his eyes intense. "You need to go back to where it started. The Ouija board. You need to finish what you started." My stomach churned at the thought of using the Ouija board again, but I knew he was right. We had to face her head on. Dr. Lancaster gave us detailed instructions for a more powerful ritual, one that would summon Baba Roga and hopefully trap her long enough to banish her for good. We drove back to my house, the dread settling in like a lead weight in my stomach. The house was dark and silent, but it felt different now. Ominous. We set up the Ouija board in the living room, following Dr. Lancaster's instructions to the letter. Maggie lit the candles and sprinkled salt in a wide circle around us. We placed our fingers on the planchette and began the chant. The air grew cold almost immediately, and the shadows in the room seemed to stretch and twist. The planchette started to move, spelling out the same name as before, Babaroga. The candles flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Suddenly, the planchette flew off the board, hitting the wall with a loud thud. The temperature plummeted, and the whispers started again, louder and more insistent. "Let me in," they hissed. "Let me in." I felt a presence behind me, a cold, malevolent force. I turned slowly, and there she was. Baba Roga stood in the center of the circle, her twisted form more terrifying than ever. Her eyes glowed with a sinister light, and her mouth stretched into that awful grin. Maggie and I continued the chant, our voices shaking but determined. Baba Roga's grin widened, and she took a step forward, but she was stopped by the circle of salt. Her expression twisted into one of rage, and she let out a guttural scream that shook the walls. The lights flickered, and the room seemed to warp and twist around us. I could feel her anger, her desire to break free and tear us apart, but we kept chanting, louder and more desperate. The air crackled with energy, and a blinding light filled the room. When the light faded, Baba Roga was gone. The oppressive feeling lifted, and the room was warm again. Maggie and I slumped to the floor, exhausted but relieved. It felt like we had won, but deep down, I knew it wasn't over. Dr. Lancaster had warned us that Baba Roga was persistent, that she would try to find a way back. But for now, she was gone. We had bought ourselves some time, and I intended to use it to find a way to end this nightmare once and for all. As we cleaned up, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every shadow seemed to hide a pair of eyes. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like footsteps. Baba Roga was out there somewhere, waiting for her chance to return, and I knew she wouldn't stop until she had what she wanted. The next few days were a haze of sleepless nights and constant paranoia. Maggie and I stayed at my place, determined to find a permanent solution to the Baba Roga problem. Jenna was still out of town, thankfully, so I didn't have to explain the craziness to her. But every creak, every shadow, set me on edge. I knew Baba Roga was still out there, waiting for her chance to come back. Maggie spent most of her time researching, diving deep into obscure occult texts and contacting every paranormal expert she could think of. Meanwhile, I tried to keep myself busy, but the house felt like a prison. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, twisted in that horrible grin. One evening, just as the sun was setting, Maggie called me into the living room. She had a grim look on her face, which did nothing to ease my nerves. "I think I found something," she said, holding up an old, leather-bound book. "It's a banishment ritual, but it's more dangerous than anything we've tried before." I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. "Dangerous how?" "It requires a direct confrontation with Baba Roga," she explained. "We'll have to summon her and trap her long enough to complete the ritual. If we mess up, she'll be free to do whatever she wants." The thought of facing Baba Roga again made my skin crawl, but we didn't have a choice. "Let's do it," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. We spent the rest of the day preparing. Maggie drew intricate symbols on the floor with chalk, and we set up candles around the room. We placed the Ouija board in the centre, knowing it would be the key to summoning her. By the time we were ready, the sun had dipped below the horizon, and the house was cloaked in darkness. Maggie lit the candles, their flickering flames casting eerie shadows on the walls. We sat down at the Ouija board, placing our fingers on the planchette. The air was heavy with anticipation as Maggie began the chant, her voice steady and clear. At first, nothing happened. The planchette remained still, and the room was silent. But then, the temperature dropped, and a faint whispering filled the air. The planchette started to move, spelling out the now familiar name, Babaroga. The candles flickered violently, and a cold wind swept through the room, extinguishing several of them. In the dim light, I saw her form take shape in the centre of the symbols. She was more grotesque than ever, her eyes glowing with a malevolent light. Maggie and I continued the chant, our voices trembling but determined. Baba Roga's grin widened, and she took a step forward, but the symbols seemed to hold her back. Her expression twisted into one of rage, and she let out a guttural scream that shook the walls. The room seemed to warp and twist around us, and the whispering grew louder, more insistent. "Let me in," they hissed. "Let me in." Baba Roga lunged at the edge of the symbols, her claws scraping against an invisible barrier. The force of her attack sent a shockwave through the room, knocking over several candles and plunging parts of the room into darkness. Maggie's voice rose above the chaos, chanting louder and faster. I joined her, my heart pounding in my chest. The symbols on the floor glowed faintly, pulsing with energy. Baba Roga howled in fury, her form flickering like a bad TV signal. We were close. I could feel it. The air crackled with energy, and a blinding light filled the room. Baba Roga's form twisted and contorted, as if she was being pulled apart. Her screams echoed in my ears, and for a moment I thought we had done it. But then the light faded, and she was still there, her form solidifying once more. She let out a low, sinister laugh, and the symbols on the floor began to fade. Maggie's chant faltered, and I felt a wave of dread wash over me. Baba Roga lunged forward, her claws inches from Maggie's face. I reacted without thinking, grabbing a candle and throwing it at her. The flame caught her cloak, and she shrieked, her form flickering again. The symbols on the floor fled back to life, and Maggie resumed the chant with renewed vigour. The room shook, and the air was filled with a deafening roar. Baba Roga's form twisted and writhed, and the symbols glowed brighter and brighter. With a final piercing scream, she exploded into a cloud of smoke and ash. The room fell silent, the air warm and still. Maggie and I sat there, breathing heavily, staring at the spot where Baba Roga had been. The symbols on the floor were charred and smoking, but the feeling of dread had lifted. It was over. We had done it, or so I thought. As we cleaned up the remains of the ritual, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong. The house felt different, yes, but not entirely safe. It was as if Baba Roga had left a part of herself behind, lurking in the shadows. We decided to stay at a hotel that night, too exhausted and on edge to sleep in the house. As we drove away, I glanced back and saw something that made my blood run cold. In the rearview mirror, I could see the faint outline of Baba Roga standing in the window, her eyes glowing with a malevolent light. I looked away, my heart pounding. Maybe we had banished her for now, but I knew deep down that she wasn't done with me. She was out there, waiting for her chance to come back, and I had a feeling that next time she wouldn't be so easy to get rid of. The hotel room was a stark contrast to the chaos of the past few days. It was quiet, almost too quiet, and I found myself jumping at every little noise. Maggie and I were both exhausted, but sleep didn't come easy. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself that we were safe. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw her, Baba Roga, lurking in the shadows, her eyes glowing with that malevolent light. Morning came, and with it, a sense of false security. The daylight made everything seem less terrifying, and for a brief moment, I allowed myself to believe that we were finally free of her. But deep down, I knew better. She was out there, waiting for the darkness to return. Maggie and I decided to visit Dr. Lancaster again, hoping he might have more answers. He greeted us with a grim expression, as if he already knew the ritual hadn't worked as planned. We explained what had happened, and he listened intently, nodding occasionally. "She's not an ordinary entity," he said finally. "Baba Roga is tied to fear and darkness. You might have banished her temporarily, but she'll keep coming back as long as there's fear for her to feed on." "So what do we do?" I asked, my voice tinged with desperation. Dr. Lancaster leaned back in his chair, contemplating. "You need to confront her directly. Face your fears head on. It's the only way to weaken her hold." The thought of facing Baba Roga again made my skin crawl. But I knew he was right. Running away wouldn't solve anything. I had to end this, once and for all. We decided to return to my house that night. It was the last place I wanted to be, but I had no choice. Maggie and I prepared as best we could, gathering supplies and reviewing the banishment ritual. Dr. Lancaster gave us a talisman, a small, intricately carved piece of wood meant to offer protection. The sun set slowly, casting long shadows over the house. By the time we arrived, darkness had settled in, and the air was thick with anticipation. We set up the Ouija board in the living room once more, lighting the candles and drawing the symbols on the floor. The house was silent, the only sound our nervous breathing. We placed our fingers on the planchette and began the chant. The temperature dropped immediately, and the shadows seemed to twist and writhe around us. The planchette moved, spelling out her name, Babaroga. A cold wind swept through the room, extinguishing several candles. In the dim light, Baba Roga appeared, her form more grotesque than ever. Her eyes glowed with a sinister light, and her mouth stretched into that awful grin. Maggie and I continued the chant, our voices trembling but determined. Baba Roga lunged at the edge of the symbols, her claws scraping against an invisible barrier. Her expression twisted into one of rage, and she let out a guttural scream that shook the walls. I felt a surge of fear, but I forced myself to stay calm. Dr. Lancaster had said I needed to confront her directly, and I knew what I had to do. I stepped forward, out of the protective circle, and faced her. Her eyes locked onto mine, and I felt a wave of terror wash over me, but I stood my ground, clutching the talisman tightly. "I'm not afraid of you," I said, my voice shaking but resolute. "You have no power over me," Baba Roga hissed, her form flickering like a bad TV signal. The room seemed to warp and twist around us, and the whispers grew louder, more insistent. "Let me in," they demanded. "Let me in," I repeated the words, louder this time. "I'm not afraid of you. You have no power over me." The air crackled with energy, and the symbols on the floor glowed brighter and brighter. Baba Roga's form twisted and contorted, as if she was being pulled apart. Her screams echoed in my ears, and for a moment I thought we had done it. But then she lunged at me, her claws inches from my face. I reacted without thinking, holding up the talisman. There was a blinding flash of light, and a deafening roar filled the room. Baba Roga's form exploded into a cloud of smoke and ash, and the room fell silent. I slumped to the floor, exhausted but relieved. Maggie rushed over, helping me up. "Did it work?" she asked, her voice trembling. I looked around the room, the oppressive feeling finally gone. "I think so," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. We spent the rest of the night in the living room, too scared to sleep, but as the first light of dawn filtered through the blinds, I felt a sense of peace. Baba Roga was gone, banished for good, or so I hoped. The days that followed were a blur of exhaustion and relief. Jenna returned from her trip, and I told her everything. She was skeptical at first, but the fear in my eyes convinced her that something had happened, even if she didn't fully understand what. Life slowly returned to normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there, lurking in the shadows. I kept the talisman close, and Maggie stayed in touch, always ready to help if needed. It's been months now, and I haven't seen or heard from Baba Roga, but every now and then I catch a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye, a shadow that seems to move on its own, and I wonder if she's really gone, or if she's just waiting for the right moment to come back. But one thing's for sure, I'll be ready. Ouija board helped me locate the dancing lady. Hey everyone, I'm not really sure how to start this, but I feel like I need to get it out there. My friends keep telling me I should talk to someone about what happened, and I figured maybe writing it down would help. So here goes. It started a few months ago. My buddy Jake got this old Ouija board from some thrift store downtown. He thought it'd be hilarious to mess around with it. You know, typical dumb college kid stuff. We were all in our third year and had some free time on our hands. So we thought, why not? We set up in my apartment one night after a few drinks. There were 4 of us, Jake, Emily, Sam, and me. We dimmed the lights, lit a couple of candles, and gathered around the board. Honestly, I thought it was just going to be a joke. We'd ask some stupid questions, freak each other out, and call it a night. Jake started by asking if anyone was there. Nothing happened at first. We asked again and again, and eventually the planchette moved. At first, I thought one of them was messing with us, but when I looked up, everyone seemed genuinely freaked out. The thing moved slowly at first, then picked up speed. "Who are we talking to?" Jake asked, his voice shaking a bit. The planchette spelled out Maria. None of us knew a Maria, so we kept going. "Maria, are you a good spirit?" Emily asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The planchette slid to NO. That was when the atmosphere in the room changed. It felt colder, and the candles flickered, even though there was no draft. We were all starting to feel really uneasy, but curiosity got the better of us. We kept asking questions, and Maria kept answering. The answers got more and more disturbing. "Where are you?" Sam asked. DANCE, it spelled out. We had no idea what that meant. We asked her what she meant by dance, but she didn't respond. Instead, the planchette spelled out FINDME. "Where?" I asked, feeling a knot form in my stomach. The planchette started moving erratically, spelling out LAKEPARK. Lake Park was this old, abandoned park on the outskirts of town. It had been shut down years ago after some pretty dark rumours about kids going missing and strange sightings. No one really went there anymore. "Why?" Jake asked, but the planchette just kept moving, spelling out the same words over and over again. FINDME. At this point, we were all pretty freaked out. We decided to stop, but the planchette wouldn't move to goodbye. It just kept spelling FINDME over and over again, until Jake finally grabbed it and shoved it off the board. The candles went out, and we all sat there in the dark, trying to catch our breath. We didn't talk much after that. Jake took the board and left, and we all went our separate ways, trying to shake off the weird feeling. But that night, I had the most vivid nightmare. I was at Lake Park, and there was this woman in a tattered dress, dancing under the moonlight. Her movements were jerky and unnatural, like she was a puppet on strings. Her face was pale, almost ghostly, with hollow eyes that seemed to look right through me. She kept whispering my name, calling me to join her. I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding. I tried to convince myself it was just a dream, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was more than that. Over the next few days, I kept seeing her in my mind, hearing her whispers when I was alone. It was like she was haunting me, and I couldn't escape. I finally broke down and told Jake about the dream. He looked at me, his face pale. He'd had the same dream. We compared notes and found out that Emily and Sam had too. It was too much to be a coincidence. We knew we had to go to Lake Park and find out what the hell was going on. So we made a plan. We'd go during the day, stick together, and just see if we could find anything. None of us wanted to admit it, but we were terrified. But we had to know. We had to find Maria, or whatever it was that called itself Maria. The day we went to Lake Park was overcast and cold. The place was even creepier than I remembered. Overgrown weeds, rusted playground equipment, and an eerie silence that seemed to swallow our footsteps. We wandered around, not really sure what we were looking for, but keeping an eye out for anything unusual. We didn't find anything at first, just the remnants of what used to be a happy place, now forgotten and decayed. We were about to give up when we heard it. Music. Faint, but unmistakable. It was coming from the old bandstand in the middle of the park. We followed the sound, our hearts pounding. As we got closer, we saw her, the dancing lady, just like in my dream. She was twirling and spinning, her dress flowing around her like smoke. Her face was still that ghastly pale, her eyes still hollow and empty. She didn't seem to notice us at first, just kept dancing to that haunting tune. Then she stopped. She turned to look at us, and a twisted smile spread across her face. "You found me," she whispered, her voice like nails on a chalkboard. I can't really explain what happened next. One moment, we were standing there, frozen in fear, and the next, she was right in front of us. Her cold, bony fingers reached out and touched my cheek, sending a chill down my spine. I wanted to run, but I couldn't move. None of us could. "You came to dance," she said, her voice echoing in my head. "Now you'll dance forever." I don't remember much after that. Just flashes of her face, those hollow eyes, and the feeling of being trapped, unable to move or speak. When I came to, we were all lying on the ground outside the park. Jake, Emily, and Sam were there too, looking as shaken as I felt. We didn't talk about what happened. We just went our separate ways, trying to pretend it was all a bad dream. But I can't shake the feeling that it's not over, that she's still out there, waiting for us. And every night I hear the music. I see her face, and I know she's calling me back to dance. I don't know if writing this will help, but I had to try. Maybe someone out there knows what's happening to us. Maybe someone can help. But for now, all I can do is try to stay away from Lake Park and pray that I never see the dancing lady again. Hey everyone, I'm back with the next part of my story. I wasn't sure if I should continue, but I feel like I need to get this out. Maybe someone out there can help us, or at least help us understand what's going on. After that day at Lake Park, things started to get worse. I thought it was just a nightmare that would fade away, but it didn't. The first sign that something was wrong happened about a week later. I was in my apartment trying to focus on my homework when I heard it, that same haunting music from the park. It was faint at first, almost like it was coming from a distance, but it grew louder, more insistent. I looked around, trying to find the source, but there was nothing. The music seemed to be coming from inside my head. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her, the dancing lady. She was always there, just out of reach, spinning and twirling, her hollow eyes fixed on me. I tried to ignore it, to convince myself it was just my imagination, but it didn't work. I was exhausted, terrified, and completely alone. Jake, Emily, and Sam were going through the same thing. We talked about it one night, desperate to find some kind of explanation. Jake's hands were shaking as he told us about the shadows he'd been seeing. They followed him everywhere, flickering in and out of existence. Emily said she kept hearing whispers, soft and seductive, telling her to come back to the park. Sam had it the worst. He started sleepwalking. waking up in strange places with no memory of how he got there. We tried to figure out what to do. Jake wanted to destroy the Ouija board, but Emily thought it might make things worse. Sam just wanted to forget everything, to pretend it never happened. I didn't know what to think. All I knew was that we were in deep and we needed help. I decided to do some research. I spent hours online looking up anything I could find about Ouija boards, haunted parks, and dancing spirits. I found stories about people who had messed with the paranormal and paid the price. Most of them didn't end well, but one story caught my attention. It was about a woman named Maria who had gone missing years ago. She was last seen at Lake Park, wearing a white dress, dancing alone under the moonlight. The more I read, the more I was convinced that Maria was the dancing lady. But why was she haunting us? What did she want? The answers were elusive, hidden in layers of myths and half-truths. I needed to know more, but every time I got close, the music would start again, and I'd have to stop. One night, I decided to go back to Lake Park. I didn't tell anyone. I just grabbed a flashlight and went. It was late, the park shrouded in darkness. The air was cold, and the silence was oppressive. I felt like I was walking into a nightmare. I made my way to the bandstand, the place where we had seen her. The music started as soon as I got close. It was louder this time, almost deafening. I saw her again, dancing in the moonlight, her movements fluid and hypnotic. She stopped when she saw me, her twisted smile spreading across her face. "You came back," she whispered, her voice echoing in my head. I tried to speak, but no words came out. My throat felt tight, my heart pounding in my chest. She moved closer, her eyes locked onto mine. "You can't leave," she said, her voice soft but insistent. "You belong to me now." I wanted to run, to scream, but I couldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, trapped by her gaze. She reached out, her fingers cold and bony, and touched my face. I felt a sharp pain, like a knife slicing through my skin. I screamed, the sound ripping through the silence. The next thing I knew, I was lying on the ground outside the park. My face was bleeding, the pain still sharp and intense. I stumbled home, my mind racing. I didn't know what to do. I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. I told Jake, Emily, and Sam what happened. They were terrified. We knew we had to do something, but we didn't know what. The haunting was getting worse, and we were all starting to break down. We needed help, but we didn't know where to turn. Then, Emily had an idea. She suggested we talk to a psychic. None of us really believed in that stuff, but we were desperate. We found a woman named Madame Serena, who had a reputation for dealing with the paranormal. We made an appointment and went to see her the next day. Madame Serena's place was filled with strange artifacts and the smell of incense. She was an older woman with piercing eyes and an air of mystery. We told her our story, and she listened intently, nodding occasionally. When we finished, she looked at us with a mixture of pity and concern. "You've angered a spirit," she said. "Maria was a young woman who died tragically at Lake Park. She was looking for something, someone, and now she's latched onto you." "Is there anything we can do?" I asked, my voice trembling. Madame Serena sighed. "There's a ritual. It's dangerous, but it might sever the connection. You'll need to go back to the park, confront Maria, and perform the ritual. If you're successful, she'll be at peace. If not..." She didn't finish, but we knew what she meant. We had no choice. We had to try. That night, we gathered at Lake Park, armed with the items Madame Serena had given us. Candles, salt, and a small silver knife. The park was eerily quiet, the darkness pressing in around us. We made our way to the bandstand, the air growing colder with each step. The music started again, louder and more insistent. Maria appeared, her ghostly form twirling and spinning in the moonlight. We formed a circle, lighting the candles and spreading the salt around us. "You came back," Maria whispered, her voice filled with a mix of anger and sadness. "We're here to help you," Emily said, her voice shaking. Maria laughed, a hollow, chilling sound. "You can't help me. You can only join me." We started the ritual, chanting the words Madame Serena had taught us. The air grew colder, the wind picking up. Maria screamed, a sound that echoed through the night, filled with rage and pain. She lunged at us, but the salt held her back. We kept chanting, our voices growing louder, stronger. The ground shook, the candles flickering wildly. I took the knife, my hand shaking, and made a small cut on my palm. I let the blood drip onto the ground, completing the ritual. Maria screamed again, her form flickering like a dying flame. She reached out one last time, her eyes filled with a desperate, haunting sorrow. And then she was gone. The music stopped, the wind died down, and the park was silent once more. We stood there, exhausted and shaken, but alive. We had done it. We had freed Maria. But the memory of her haunted eyes, her twisted smile, would stay with us forever. We left Lake Park that night, vowing never to return. The haunting stopped, but the scars remained. We tried to move on with our lives, but we would never forget the dancing lady and the terror she brought into our lives. I don't know if sharing this will help anyone, but I had to try. If you ever come across a Ouija board or hear about Lake Park, stay away. Some spirits are better left undisturbed. Hey everyone, I'm back with part 3 of my story. Things didn't end with that night at Lake Park. I thought they would, but I was wrong. Horribly wrong. For a while, it seemed like things were getting back to normal. The nightmares stopped, the music faded away, and the whispers in the shadows disappeared. We all started to feel a bit more at ease, thinking that maybe, just maybe, we had put it all behind us. But deep down, I think we all knew it wasn't over. It started with small things. I would catch glimpses of her in reflective surfaces, mirrors, windows, even the screen of my phone. Just a fleeting image of Maria's pale, hollow-eyed face, gone as quickly as it appeared. I tried to convince myself it was my mind playing tricks on me, residual fear from our ordeal. But it wasn't just me. Emily called me one night, her voice trembling with fear. She said she had seen Maria too, in the mirror while brushing her teeth. Sam reported hearing the music again, faint but unmistakable. Jake started seeing shadows, more persistent and menacing than before. It was like Maria was still with us, still haunting us. We decided to meet up, hoping that sticking together might help. We gathered at my apartment, our faces pale and drawn. None of us had been sleeping well. The sense of dread was overwhelming, suffocating. We should go back to Madame Serena, Emily suggested, her voice barely above a whisper. She said the ritual would work, Jake muttered, frustration edging his words. What the hell did we do wrong? I didn't have an answer. None of us did. All we knew was that Maria was still with us, and she wasn't going to let us go that easily. We decided to visit Madame Serena again. When we arrived, she looked at us with a mixture of pity and resignation. I feared this might happen, she said. Sometimes spirits are too tormented, too powerful to be easily banished. What can we do? Sam asked, his voice breaking. We can't keep living like this. Madame Serena sighed. There is one more thing you can try, but it's dangerous. You must confront Maria one final time in her realm. You need to find what keeps her bound to this world and destroy it. Her realm? The idea sent a chill down my spine. How do we get there? I asked, dreading the answer. Madame Serena handed us a small, ornate mirror. This mirror will take you there, but be warned. What you find may be more terrifying than anything you've experienced. You must be strong, and you must not let her deceive you. That night, we gathered in my apartment. The air was thick with tension and fear. We placed the mirror on the table, its surface reflecting our anxious faces. Madame Serena had told us to hold hands and focus on the mirror, letting our fear and determination guide us. As we stared into the mirror, the room around us began to blur and distort. The air grew colder, and a strange, otherworldly wind whipped around us. I felt a pull, like something was dragging me forward, into the mirror. I tried to resist, but it was too strong. Everything went black. When I opened my eyes, we were in a place that looked like Lake Park, but twisted and decayed. The trees were blackened and dead, the grass a sickly grey. The air was heavy with the scent of decay and something else, something metallic and sharp. Blood. We stood in the middle of the park, the bandstand looming ahead. The music was louder here, relentless and haunting. Maria was there, dancing as always, her movements more frantic and desperate. She saw us and stopped, her eyes locking onto mine. "You shouldn't have come back," she hissed, her voice echoing through the twisted landscape. "We're here to end this," Emily said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. Maria laughed, a sound that sent chills down my spine. "End this? You can't end this. You belong to me now." We knew we had to find what was binding her to this place. We split up, searching the bandstand and the surrounding area. The sense of dread grew stronger with every step, the air thickening, making it hard to breathe. I found it first. Hidden beneath the floorboards of the bandstand was a small, rusted locket. I pried it open, revealing a tiny photograph of a young woman, Maria. She looked so different, alive, happy. It was hard to reconcile this image with the twisted spirit that haunted us. She was waiting for someone, I whispered, realization dawning. Someone she loved. Jake, Emily and Sam gathered around, their faces reflecting the same understanding. Maria had died waiting for someone who never came, her spirit trapped in this twisted version of Lake Park, consumed by rage and sorrow. "We need to destroy it," Jake said, his voice firm. "It's the only way to free her." As we prepared to destroy the locket, Maria appeared in front of us, her face twisted with rage and pain. "No!" she screamed, lunging at us. Her form flickered and twisted, growing more monstrous with each step. Her eyes burned with a terrifying intensity, and her fingers elongated into sharp, deadly claws. We backed away, but she was relentless. "You can't take it from me," she shrieked, her voice filled with desperation. Emily stepped forward, holding the locket out in front of her. "We're here to help you, Maria. You don't have to be trapped here anymore." Maria's form flickered, her rage giving way to a look of profound sorrow. For a moment, I saw the young woman in the photograph, lost and heartbroken, but the darkness within her was too strong. She lunged at Emily, her claws slashing through the air. I acted on instinct, grabbing the locket from Emily's hand and smashing it against the ground. There was a blinding flash of light and a scream that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Maria's form disintegrated, her screams fading into the night. The twisted landscape of Lake Park began to dissolve, the darkness lifting. We found ourselves back in my apartment, the mirror shattered on the table. We were shaken, but alive. We had done it. We had freed Maria. The haunting stopped after that. The nightmares, the music, the whispers, they all vanished. But the experience left its mark on us. We tried to move on with our lives, but we would never forget what happened. The memory of Maria's haunted eyes, her twisted smile, would stay with us forever. I don't know if sharing this will help anyone, but I had to try. If you ever come across a Ouija board or hear about Lake Park, stay away. Some spirits are better left undisturbed. Hey everyone, I'm back with part 4. I thought it was all over after we destroyed the locket. I thought Maria had been freed, and we could finally move on. But I was wrong. Things were about to get a lot worse. A few weeks passed without incident. We all tried to get back to our lives, but the memories lingered. I started seeing a therapist, hoping it would help me process what happened. Jake, Emily and Sam did the same. We leaned on each other, trying to find some semblance of normalcy. But then, strange things started happening again. It began with small, almost unnoticeable occurrences. Objects in my apartment would move on their own. I'd wake up to find my bookshelves rearranged, my kitchen drawers open, and items missing. At first, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me. I'd been through a lot, and maybe I was just paranoid. But then, I started seeing her again. One night, I was brushing my teeth when I saw her reflection in the mirror, Maria. She wasn't dancing this time. She just stood there, staring at me with those hollow, haunting eyes. I turned around, but she was gone. When I looked back at the mirror, there was nothing there. I tried to convince myself it was just a hallucination, a remnant of my trauma, but it felt too real. The next day, Jake called me in a panic. He said he'd seen Maria in his apartment too. She was standing in the corner of his bedroom, watching him as he slept. He was terrified, and I couldn't blame him. Emily and Sam reported similar experiences. We realised that whatever we had done, it hadn't been enough. We decided to meet up again, this time at Jake's place. His apartment was small and cramped, filled with the remnants of a life disrupted by fear. We sat around his kitchen table, the air thick with tension. "We need to go back to Madame Serena," Emily said, her voice trembling. "She's not going to have any more answers for us," Jake replied, frustration evident in his tone. "We need to figure this out on our own." I didn't know what to do. We had already gone through so much, and now it felt like we were back at square one. "Maybe we missed something," I suggested. "Maybe there's something else binding her to this world." We decided to return to Lake Park one last time, hoping to find some clue, some answer that we had overlooked. It was a cold, dreary night when we arrived. The park even more desolate and foreboding than before. The air was heavy with a sense of impending doom. As we walked through the park, the memories of our previous encounters flooded back. We reached the bandstand, the place where it had all started. The atmosphere was oppressive, the darkness seemingly alive with the malevolent intent. We spread out, searching for anything that might help us. Emily found an old weathered diary hidden beneath a loose floorboard. It was filled with entries written in a delicate, looping script. Maria's diary. As we read through it, a clearer picture of her life began to emerge. She had been deeply in love with a man who had promised to meet her at the park, but he never showed. She waited for hours, dancing under the moonlight, her heart breaking with each passing minute. Eventually, she took her own life, unable to bear the pain of her unfulfilled love. The final entry was particularly disturbing. It was filled with rage and despair, her words almost illegible. She had cursed the park, vowing to haunt anyone who disturbed her final resting place. We realized that destroying the locket hadn't been enough. Her anger and sorrow had bound her spirit to the park, and now to us. "We need to find her grave," I said, a sense of urgency gripping me. "We need to put her to rest properly." We searched the park, following the clues in the diary. It led us to a secluded area, overgrown with weeds and brambles. There, we found a small, unmarked grave. It was a somber sight, the final resting place of a tormented soul. We decided to perform a proper burial ritual, hoping it would finally bring her peace. We gathered flowers and candles, arranging them around the grave. Emily read a passage from the diary, her voice breaking with emotion. Jake and Sam dug a small hole, placing the locket and the diary inside. We covered it with dirt, each of us saying a few words, asking for Maria's forgiveness and peace. As we finished, the air around us grew colder, the wind picking up. For a moment I thought I saw her standing there, her face softening, her eyes filled with gratitude. And then, she was gone. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, replaced by a sense of calm. We left the park, hoping that this time it was truly over. But the events of the past months had left their mark. We were changed, haunted by our experiences. We tried to move on, but the fear lingered, a constant reminder of the darkness we had faced. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still wrong. I tried to sleep, but the sense of unease kept me awake. I heard a faint whisper, barely audible, but unmistakable. "You can't leave!" I bolted upright, my heart pounding. The room was empty, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. I looked around, my eyes scanning the shadows, but there was nothing there. I tried to calm myself, convincing myself it was just my imagination, but deep down, I knew. Maria wasn't gone. She was still with us, still bound by her curse. And as long as she remained, we would never truly be free. I don't know if sharing this will help anyone, but I had to try. If you ever come across a Ouija board or hear about Lake Park, stay away. Some spirits are better left undisturbed. Hey everyone, I'm back with the final part of my story. I wish I could tell you it has a happy ending, but the truth is much darker. If you've been following this far, you know what we went through. Here's how it all came to an end. After that night at Lake Park, we tried to carry on with our lives, but it was impossible. The hauntings became more intense. Maria's presence was undeniable. I would wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, her whispers filling my ears. Jake started seeing her during the day, her figure looming in his peripheral vision. Emily and Sam were no better off. They reported feeling her touch, cold and unnerving, whenever they were alone. Desperation led us back to Madame Serena. She seemed unsurprised to see us, her expression grave. "I feared this might happen," she said, her voice heavy with sorrow. "Maria's curse is powerful. It's not just her spirit that binds her. It's the hatred and sorrow she felt when she died. You must face her one last time and break the curse from within." "What do you mean?" Jake asked, his voice barely masking his frustration and fear. "You must enter her realm again, willingly this time," Madame Serena explained. "You need to confront her and make her understand that she is free to move on. It will be dangerous, and if you fail, her curse will bind you forever. We didn't have a choice. We couldn't live like this, haunted and tormented. We agreed to go back, hoping this final confrontation would end our nightmare. That night, we gathered in Emily's apartment. We brought the same mirror Madame Serena had given us, the one that had taken us to Maria's realm before. We formed a circle, holding hands, and focused our minds. As we stared into the mirror, the world around us began to blur and distort once again. The air grew colder, and that familiar, otherworldly wind whipped around us. When we opened our eyes, we were back in that twisted version of Lake Park. The air was thick with dread, and the ground beneath our feet felt unstable. The bandstand loomed ahead, a dark silhouette against the ghostly landscape. Maria was there, as we expected, dancing her eerie dance under the moonlight. But this time, she wasn't alone. The shadows of countless others surrounded her, their faces twisted with torment and despair. We realized with horror that these were the souls of others who had fallen victim to her curse. We approached cautiously, our hearts pounding. As we got closer, Maria stopped dancing and turned to face us. Her eyes were filled with rage, but there was something else there too. An overwhelming sadness. "You came back," she hissed, her voice echoing through the twisted landscape. "You shouldn't have come back." "We're here to help you, Maria," Emily said, stepping forward. "You don't have to be trapped here anymore. You can move on." Maria's face contorted with anger. "You think you can help me? You think you can free me? You know nothing of my pain, my suffering." "We understand your pain," Jake said, his voice steady. "But holding on to this hatred is only hurting you more. It's time to let go." Maria's form flickered, her anger giving way to a look of profound sorrow. For a moment, she looked like the young woman in the photograph, lost and heartbroken. But the darkness within her was still strong. She lunged at us, her eyes burning with a terrifying intensity. I acted on instinct, stepping in front of my friends. "Maria, we're sorry for what happened to you. We're sorry for your pain. But you need to let go. You need to move on." She stopped, her hollow eyes boring into mine. The wind around us grew stronger, the air crackling with energy. I felt a cold, bony hand on my shoulder, and then everything went black. When I opened my eyes, I was alone in the twisted park. The air was thick with silence, the shadows watching me with unblinking eyes. Maria stood in front of me, her face a mask of rage and sorrow. "Why should I trust you?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "Because we're here to help you," I said, my voice steady despite the fear coursing through me. "You don't have to suffer anymore. Let us help you find peace." Maria's form flickered again, her eyes filling with tears. "I waited so long," she whispered, her voice filled with despair. "I waited, and he never came." "We're here now," I said softly. "Let us help you move on." She looked at me, her eyes filled with a mix of anger and hope. Slowly, she reached out and touched my hand. The coldness of her touch was almost unbearable, but I held on, refusing to let go. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. With those words, the landscape around us began to dissolve. The shadows faded, the twisted trees and decayed grass disappearing into nothingness. Maria's form grew brighter, her eyes softening as the darkness left her. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with gratitude. "Thank you for freeing me." And then she was gone. The twisted version of Lake Park dissolved completely, replaced by the familiar surroundings of Emily's apartment. We were back, and for the first time in months, the air felt light, the oppressive atmosphere gone. We knew that it was finally over. Maria was at peace, and so were we. The hauntings stopped, and the nightmares faded away. We could finally move on with our lives. The memory of our ordeal a distant echo. I don't know if sharing this will help anyone, but I had to try. If you ever come across a Ouija board or hear about Lake Park, stay away. Some spirits are better left undisturbed, and if you find yourself in a similar situation, remember that sometimes the only way to end the nightmare is to confront it head on, no matter how terrifying it may be. I contacted a real angel through the Ouija board, so I never believed in any of this supernatural crap. Ghosts, demons, angels, they all seemed like bedtime stories for gullible people. But last month, my friend Mike convinced me to mess around with a Ouija board. It was just supposed to be a bit of fun, a stupid way to kill time on a Saturday night. I wish I had just walked away. We were at Mike's place. He lives in this old, creepy house his grandmother left him. The place always gave me the creeps. It was filled with ancient furniture and dusty old portraits that seemed to stare at you wherever you went. Anyway, we were in his living room, the lights dimmed to set the mood. Mike brought out the Ouija board, a cheap wooden one he had bought from some novelty store. At first, it was just us two, sitting there, giggling like idiots. We both placed our hands on the planchette, asking silly questions like, "Is there anyone here with us?" And, "What's the name of my future wife?" We kept pushing the planchette ourselves, laughing at how ridiculous it was. But after a while, things started to get weird. The air in the room felt heavier, colder. I remember getting this sinking feeling in my stomach, like something bad was about to happen. Mike was about to call it quits when the planchette started moving on its own. I swear to God, neither of us were pushing it. It glided smoothly to yes. Mike's face went pale. "Did you do that?" he asked. "No, man, I didn't," I replied, my voice shaking. We stared at each other for a moment, then back at the board. It was my turn to ask a question. "Who are you?" The planchette started to move again, spelling out ANGEL. We both laughed nervously. "An angel?" "Yeah, right," Mike said. "Prove it," I challenged, half expecting the board to just spell out some gibberish. But it didn't. It spelled out ICANSHOWYOU. Mike and I exchanged glances, unsure of what to do next. "What can you show us?" Mike asked. "YOURFUTURE. I felt a chill run down my spine. "This is getting too freaky, man. Maybe we should stop," I suggested. But Mike was hooked. "No way, this is just getting interesting. Ask it something else." "Fine," I said reluctantly. "Show us our future." The planchette started to move faster, almost frantically. It spelled out LOOKINTHEMIRROR. We both turned to the large antique mirror hanging on the wall opposite us. At first, I didn't see anything unusual, just our reflections, looking a bit spooked. But then, I noticed something. There was a shadowy figure standing behind Mike. It was tall, with unnaturally long limbs, and a face that was twisted into an expression of pure hatred. I screamed, "Mike, behind you!" He turned around quickly, but there was nothing there. When he looked back at the mirror, the figure was gone. "What the hell was that?" Mike whispered, his voice trembling. "I don't know, but I think we should stop," I said, my heart pounding in my chest. But before we could move the planchette to goodbye, it started moving again, spelling out YOUAREMINE. The lights flickered, and the room got even colder. Suddenly, Mike clutched his chest and gasped for air. "I can't breathe!" he choked out, collapsing onto the floor. I panicked, grabbing my phone to call 911, but as I dialed, I saw something that made my blood run cold. In the mirror, I could see the shadowy figure again, this time standing over Mike's body, its twisted face grinning with malevolent glee. Mike's body convulsed violently, and then he went still. The paramedics arrived within minutes, but it was too late. They said it was a heart attack, but I knew better. Whatever we had contacted through that Ouija board had killed him. I wish I could say that was the end of it, but it wasn't. That night was just the beginning. I started seeing things, hearing whispers in the dead of night. The shadowy figure followed me everywhere, always lurking just out of sight. And every time I looked in the mirror, it was there, grinning at me with that same twisted expression. I tried getting rid of the board, but no matter what I did, it always found its way back to me. I burned it, buried it, threw it in the river, but it always reappeared, usually in the most unexpected places, under my bed, in my closet, even in the trunk of my car. And the messages didn't stop. Every time I used the board, it would spell out more terrifying things. IWILLNEVERLEAVEYOU, YOUCANNOTRUN. And the worst one, WEARENOTALONE. I haven't slept properly in weeks. Every time I close my eyes, I see that figure, feel its icy breath on my neck. I'm constantly looking over my shoulder, waiting for the day it decides to do more than just haunt me. If you're reading this, please stay away from Ouija boards. You never know what you might invite into your life. I'm living a nightmare, and I don't know if I'll ever wake up. I barely slept after Mike's death. The paramedics, the police, they all said the same thing. Heart attack. But I knew the truth, and it was eating me alive. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me home from that night. The shadowy figure in the mirror was only the beginning. A week after the incident, I noticed small things at first. Objects moving on their own, doors creaking open, cold spots in my apartment. I tried to ignore it, chalking it up to my imagination. But then things got worse. One night, I was watching TV, trying to distract myself from the constant dread. Suddenly, the screen went black, and my reflection appeared in the blank screen. But I wasn't alone. The shadowy figure was standing behind me again, closer this time, its twisted face more defined, eyes burning with hatred. I whipped around, but of course, there was nothing there. I turned off the TV and went to bed, praying for some sleep. As soon as I lay down, the whispers started. Soft at first, like a gentle breeze rustling through the leaves, but they grew louder, more insistent, until they were echoing in my skull. GETOUT, LEAVENOW, HEBELONGSTOUS. I clamped my hands over my ears, but the whispers didn't stop. It felt like they were coming from inside my head. I was on the verge of tears, my heart racing, when the whispers suddenly stopped. I opened my eyes and saw it, standing at the foot of my bed. The shadowy figure loomed over me, its face inches from mine. I could see its eyes now, glowing with an unnatural light, and its mouth twisted into a cruel grin. It reached out a long, skeletal hand, and I felt a cold, clammy touch on my foot. I screamed and kicked, my foot passing through the figure, hitting nothing but air. But the touch left a mark, 4 long red scratches that burned like fire. I spent the rest of the night huddled in the corner of my room, too terrified to move. When morning finally came, I called in sick to work. I knew I had to do something, but I didn't know what. I started researching everything I could about Ouija boards, hauntings, and exorcisms. I found forums and chat rooms filled with people who had similar experiences. Some of their stories were even more horrifying than mine. People driven to madness, others who had disappeared without a trace. Desperate, I reached out to a few of them, asking for advice. Most responses were unhelpful, but one person stood out. They went by the username Guardian Angel 7 and claimed to be an expert in dealing with malicious spirits. They offered to help me, but only if I was willing to do exactly as they said. I was skeptical, but what choice did I have? I agreed, and they sent me a list of instructions, rituals, protective symbols, things to banish the spirit. I gathered everything I needed and prepared for the ritual that night. The instructions were detailed, but I followed them to the letter. I drew a circle of salt around my living room, lit candles at the cardinal points, and placed protective charms around the room. I chanted the incantations, feeling foolish but desperate. At first, nothing happened. I was about to give up when the temperature in the room plummeted. My breath fogged in front of me, and the candles flickered violently. The whispers started again, louder and more aggressive than before. YOUCANNOTESCAPE, HEISOURSGIVEUP. I ignored them, focusing on the final incantation. As I finished, there was a deafening silence, followed by an ear-piercing screech. The shadowy figure appeared again, thrashing against the boundaries of the salt circle. Its form wavered, becoming more grotesque with each passing second. I forced myself to keep chanting, tears streaming down my face. Suddenly, the figure exploded into a cloud of black smoke, which was sucked out of the room as if by a vacuum. The room grew warmer, the candles steadying. It was over, or so I thought. Exhausted, I collapsed on the couch, trying to convince myself that I had won. But deep down, I knew better. The whispers might have stopped, the figure might be gone, but I could still feel it, an oppressive presence, watching, waiting. That night, I slept with the lights on. The nightmares were relentless, vivid, and terrifying. I saw Mike, his face twisted in agony, reaching out to me, begging for help. I woke up screaming, drenched in sweat. I knew I needed help, real help. The rituals, the charms, they were temporary solutions. Whatever I had contacted wasn't going to give up that easily. I reached out to Guardian Angel 7 again, telling them what had happened. They responded quickly, their message cryptic but clear. You're dealing with something far worse than a ghost. You need to find its anchor, something tying it to your world. Destroy it, and you might stand a chance. I didn't know what the anchor could be. The Ouija board was the obvious choice, but I had destroyed it multiple times. There had to be something else, something I was missing. As I tore apart my apartment, searching for anything that seemed out of place, I found it. Tucked away in a corner of my closet was an old, leather-bound book. I had never seen it before, but it felt wrong. The cover was etched with strange symbols, and as soon as I touched it, I felt a jolt of fear. I knew what I had to do. The book had to be destroyed. I took it to the backyard, doused it in lighter fluid, and set it ablaze. The fire roared to life, and as the book burned, I heard a final, agonized scream. The air seemed to clear, the oppressive presence lifting, but the fear didn't leave me. I knew that whatever I had faced was gone, but the scars it left behind would never heal. Mike was dead because of me, and that guilt would haunt me forever. I moved out of my apartment the next day, leaving everything behind. I needed a fresh start, somewhere far away from the memories. But every time I look in the mirror, I can't help but check over my shoulder, just in case. If you're reading this, take my advice. Never mess with things you don't understand. You might not be as lucky as I was. After moving out of my apartment, I hoped for a fresh start. I found a small place on the outskirts of town, far from the haunting memories of Mike and the nightmare I'd lived through. But even in my new home, I couldn't escape the feeling that something was watching me. The first few nights were restless. I kept waking up in cold sweats, convinced I heard whispers just outside my window. The nightmares persisted, visions of Mike, his tortured face, and the shadowy figure looming over me. I started avoiding mirrors, afraid of what I might see. One night, I decided to visit a local bar, hoping a few drinks would help me sleep. I struck up a conversation with the bartender, a middle-aged woman named Karen. She was kind and seemed genuinely interested in my story, so I told her everything about the Ouija board, Mike's death, and the haunting that followed. Karen listened intently, her expression growing more serious with each passing detail. When I finished, she leaned in and whispered, "You're not the first person to experience something like this around here. There's an old legend about a vengeful spirit that preys on those who try to contact the other side. They say it feeds on fear and suffering, I felt a chill run down my spine. "What can I do to stop it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Karen glanced around, making sure no one else was listening. "There's a man who lives on the outskirts of town, near the old cemetery. They call him the Seer. He might be able to help you." Desperate for answers, I decided to find this Seer. The next morning, I drove to the edge of town, following Karen's vague directions. After a few wrong turns, I found myself in front of a dilapidated cabin surrounded by dense woods. The air was thick with an eerie silence, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves. I hesitated at the door, but then knocked. The door creaked open, and an elderly man with piercing blue eyes stared back at me. "You're looking for answers," he said, his voice gravelly and ancient. I nodded, feeling a lump form in my throat. "Karen told me you could help." The Seer stepped aside, allowing me to enter. The inside of his cabin was filled with strange artifacts, animal bones, dried herbs, and old, tattered books. He motioned for me to sit and began preparing a concoction of herbs and oils, muttering incantations under his breath. "You've attracted a powerful entity," he said, handing me a steaming cup of the foul-smelling brew. "It's not just a ghost. It's something far more sinister." I took a tentative sip, gagging at the bitter taste. "How do I get rid of it?" I asked. The Seer's eyes narrowed. "It's not that simple. This spirit is anchored to you through something personal, something tied to your soul. You must sever that connection." He instructed me to bring any personal items I had from my old apartment, things that might have been tainted by the spirit's presence. Reluctantly, I returned home and gathered what few belongings I had brought with me: clothes, a few books, and an old photo album. When I returned to the Seer's cabin, he began a ritual, chanting in a language I didn't understand. He sprinkled the items with holy water, then set them ablaze in a metal basin. The flames roared to life, and I felt a sudden, intense pain in my chest, as if my heart was being ripped apart. The Seer continued chanting, his voice rising above the crackling flames. I collapsed to my knees, gasping for air. The room seemed to spin, the shadows dancing menacingly around me. Just as I thought I couldn't bear the pain any longer, it stopped. The flames died down, leaving only ashes. "You're free," the Seer said, his voice weary, "but the scars will remain. You must be careful not to attract its attention again." I thanked him and left the cabin, feeling a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. For the first time in weeks, I slept peacefully that night, free from nightmares and whispers. But the relief was short-lived. A few days later, I received a package in the mail. There was no return address, just my name scrawled in an unfamiliar handwriting. Inside was a small leather-bound journal. My heart sank as I recognized it, the same symbols etched into its cover as the book I had burned. With trembling hands, I opened the journal. The pages were filled with grotesque drawings and disturbing messages. WEARENOTDONE, HESTILLBELONGSTOUS. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. How had it found me? I thought I had destroyed its anchor. Desperation turned to anger as I realized I was still being hunted. Determined to end this once and for all, I went back to the Seer. He looked at the journal, his expression grim. "This spirit is relentless. It's not just about you, it's after something more." "What do you mean?" I asked, dread creeping into my voice. "It's feeding on the connection you had with Mike. It wants to consume your guilt, your fear. You need to confront it. Face the source of your torment." I knew what I had to do, but the thought of going back to Mike's house filled me with terror. The place where it all began, where my best friend died because of me. Armed with the Seer's advice and a renewed sense of determination, I drove to Mike's house. The place looked even more dilapidated, abandoned since his death. As I stepped inside, the air was thick with a malevolent presence. I could feel it watching me, waiting. I made my way to the living room, where the Ouija board had been. The room was cold, darker than it should have been. I stood in the center, feeling the weight of my guilt and fear pressing down on me. "I'm here!" I shouted, my voice echoing through the empty house. "Show yourself!" The room grew colder, and the shadowy figure appeared, more solid and menacing than ever. Its eyes burned with hatred, its grin wider, revealing sharp, jagged teeth. "You want me! Here I am!" I yelled, stepping forward. The figure lunged at me, and I braced for impact. But instead of attacking, it stopped inches from my face, its breath icy against my skin. "Heisous," it hissed. "No," I said, my voice steady. "He's gone, and you have no power over me." The figure screamed, a sound that echoed through my very soul, but I stood my ground, refusing to give in to the fear. The room began to shake, the walls cracking, as the spirit's form wavered. "You have no power here," I repeated, my voice growing stronger. "I am not afraid of you." With one final agonized scream, the figure dissolved into smoke, sucked into the cracks in the walls. The room grew still, the oppressive presence lifting. I knew it was over. Exhausted but relieved, I left Mike's house for the last time. The drive home felt surreal, the weight of the past few weeks finally lifting. I knew I would carry the scars forever, but I had faced my demons and won. If you're reading this, remember, sometimes the only way to defeat your fears is to confront them head on, and never, ever mess with things you don't understand. I wish I could say that my confrontation with the spirit in Mike's house brought me peace. For a few days, I believed it had. The nightmares stopped, the whispers ceased, and I began to think I could move on. But trauma has a way of festering, and soon the horror began to creep back into my life in ways I could never have imagined. It started with small things. I'd find objects out of place. Keys that I distinctly remembered putting on the table would be on the floor. Pictures on the wall would be tilted or moved entirely. I tried to tell myself it was just my mind playing tricks, that I was still recovering from everything that had happened. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. One evening, I was doing some cleaning, trying to keep myself busy. I had a sudden urge to check the attic. I hadn't been up there since I moved in, but something compelled me to go. I climbed the creaky wooden ladder, flashlight in hand, and pushed open the attic door. The smell of dust and old wood filled the air. As I shone the flashlight around, I saw boxes of old clothes, forgotten furniture, and piles of books. But in the far corner, something caught my eye. A large, ornate mirror, covered in a thick layer of dust. My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't brought this mirror with me, and I had never seen it before. Against my better judgment, I approached the mirror. As I wiped away the dust, my reflection stared back at me, but something was wrong. The room reflected in the mirror was not the attic. It was Mike's living room. The same old furniture, the same dusty portraits on the walls. And there, in the background, was the Ouija board, lying on the floor where we had left it. I stepped back, my heart pounding. The image in the mirror flickered, and the shadowy figure appeared, its eyes glowing with malice. I turned to run, but the attic door slammed shut, trapping me inside. The air grew cold, and I could hear the whispers again, louder this time. "Oucannotescape, Heisstillwithhyou." I banged on the door, screaming for help, but no one could hear me. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. I turned back to the mirror, and the figure was right behind me, its twisted grin mocking me. Desperate, I grabbed an old sheet and threw it over the mirror, hoping to block out the image. The whispers stopped, and the room grew warmer. I slumped to the floor, my mind racing. I had thought the spirit was gone, but it was still here, still tormenting me. I stayed away from the attic after that, but the disturbances continued. One night, I woke to find my bedroom door open, even though I was sure I had closed it. I heard footsteps in the hallway, slow and deliberate. I grabbed a baseball bat from under my bed and crept to the door, my heart pounding. The hallway was empty, but the footsteps continued, leading down the stairs. I followed, gripping the bat tightly. The footsteps stopped at the front door, which was wide open. I stepped outside, scanning the darkness, but there was no one there. Just as I was about to go back inside, I heard a whisper right next to my ear. H-E-I-S-O-U-R-S. I spun around, swinging the bat wildly, but hit nothing but air. The door slammed shut, locking me outside. I banged on it, shouting for help, but the house was silent. I had no choice but to spend the night on the porch, too terrified to sleep. The next morning, I called Karen, the bartender who had told me about the seer. I needed answers, and she was the only person I could trust. She agreed to meet me at the bar after her shift. When I arrived, Karen was already waiting for me, a concerned look on her face. "What happened?" she asked. I told her everything, the mirror, the footsteps, the whispers. She listened, her expression growing more serious. "I think the spirit isn't just after you," she said. "It's trying to drive you insane, to break you down so it can take over completely." "What can I do?" I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. Karen thought for a moment. "There's an old legend about a ritual that can sever the connection between you and the spirit. But it's risky. If it goes wrong, it could make things worse." "I'll do anything," I said. "I can't live like this anymore." Karen nodded and told me what I needed. A candle, a piece of paper with my name written in my own blood, and something that belonged to Mike. I had kept a photo of us from when we were kids, and I hoped that would be enough. That night, I set up the ritual in my living room, following Karen's instructions. I lit the candle and placed the photo and the paper with my name on it in front of me. I began to chant the words Karen had given me, my voice shaking. At first, nothing happened, but then the air grew cold and the candle flickered. The whispers started again, louder and more aggressive. The shadowy figure appeared, standing in the doorway, its eyes burning with hatred. I continued chanting, even as the figure moved closer. The room shook and the walls seemed to close in around me. The figure reached out, its cold, clammy hand brushing against my face. "Youdlneveribree," it hissed. I forced myself to keep chanting, my voice rising above the whispers. The figure screamed, a sound that echoed through my very soul. The candle flame flared, and the photo burst into flames. The figure recoiled, its form wavering. With one final agonized scream, the figure dissolved into smoke, sucked out of the room. The candle flickered and went out, leaving me in darkness. I collapsed to the floor, exhausted but relieved. The oppressive presence was gone and the room felt lighter. I knew the ritual had worked, but I also knew that I would never be the same. I moved again, this time to a small town far from everything that had happened. I started seeing a therapist, trying to piece my life back together. The nightmares still come, but they're less frequent, and the whispers have stopped. If you're reading this, remember, there are things in this world that we don't understand. Things that can destroy us if we're not careful. Never take the supernatural lightly, and never mess with things you can't control. I thought moving to a small town would bring me peace. For a while, it did. The therapy sessions helped, and I started to feel like myself again. I made new friends, got a job, and began to rebuild my life. But the past has a way of creeping back, no matter how far you run. It was a quiet evening when it happened. I was sitting in my living room, reading a book, when the lights flickered. I felt a cold draft sweep through the room, and my heart sank. The whispers started again, soft at first, barely audible. I tried to ignore them, telling myself it was just my imagination, but they grew louder, more insistent. HEISHERE, YOUCANNOTHIDE. I froze, my mind racing. How could it be back? I had done everything right, followed every precaution, but deep down, I knew. The spirit had never truly left. It had just been waiting, biding its time, determined not to let it control me again. I grabbed my phone and called Karen. She answered on the second ring, her voice tense. "It's back, isn't it?" "Yes," I said, my voice trembling. "What do I do?" Karen was silent for a moment. "You need to confront it one last time. There's a final ritual, but it's dangerous. It requires you to face the spirit head-on, in the place where it all began." "Mike's house?" I asked, dread pooling in my stomach. "Yes," she replied, "but you won't be alone. I'll be there to help you." We agreed to meet at Mike's house the next night. I spent the day preparing, gathering the items Karen had listed: salt, candles, a mirror, and a piece of Mike's clothing I had kept as a memento. I drove to the house, my heart pounding the entire way. When I arrived, Karen was already there, setting up the ritual in the living room. The house looked even more decrepit, the air thick with an oppressive presence. We worked in silence, placing the candles at the corners of the room and sprinkling salt around the perimeter. Karen handed me the mirror and Mike's shirt. "This will draw the spirit out. You need to hold it together no matter what happens." I nodded, clutching the items tightly. Karen began chanting, her voice strong and steady. The air grew colder and the shadows deepened. The whispers returned, louder and more aggressive. "Wearenotdoneheisours." The shadowy figure appeared, more solid and menacing than ever. Its eyes glowed with hatred, and it grinned, revealing rows of jagged teeth. It moved towards me, its form shifting and writhing. I held up the mirror, forcing myself to look into its eyes. "I'm not afraid of you," I said, my voice shaking. "You have no power over me." The figure screamed, a sound that reverberated through the house. It lunged at me, its hand reaching for the mirror. I held my ground, focusing on Karen's chant. The figure's form wavered, its grip weakening. Karen's chant grew louder, and the figure screamed again, its form dissolving into smoke. The room shook, the walls cracking as the spirit was drawn into the mirror. With one final agonized wail, it was gone, trapped within the glass. The room fell silent, the oppressive presence lifting. I collapsed to the floor, exhausted but relieved. Karen knelt beside me, her face pale but determined. "It's over," she said, her voice soft. "You did it." I nodded, tears streaming down my face. The nightmare was finally over. The spirit was trapped, its power broken. I could finally move on. We buried the mirror in the backyard, surrounded by a circle of salt and protective charms. As we covered it with earth, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The past was buried, and I could finally start to heal. I moved back to my small town, determined to live my life free from fear. The nightmares still come, but they're less frequent, and the whispers have stopped. I continue to see my therapist, and with time, the scars have begun to fade. If you're reading this, remember, there are things in this world we don't understand, things that can destroy us if we're not careful. Never take the supernatural lightly, and never mess with things you can't control. I've learned that the hard way, and I'm lucky to be alive. This is the end of my story, but it's not the end of my journey. I'll carry the memories with me forever, a reminder of the darkness that lurks just beyond the veil. But I'm stronger now, and I know that no matter what comes, I can face it. Thank you for reading. Stay safe, and remember, you're never truly alone.